The morning in Savannah carried a quiet, deceptive calm. The Spanish moss hung heavily from the live oaks lining the streets, the mist rolling off the river giving the historic district a muted, almost eerie glow. Detective Olivia Harper parked her car near the edge of Forsyth Park and watched as the early sunlight flickered against the wrought iron fence. Her thoughts were elsewhere, lingering on a case that had haunted the city for years, the disappearance of 21-year-old Mandy Franklin. The young woman had vanished in the summer of 1976, and despite the extensive investigation at the time, the case had gone cold, leaving her family in a fog of unanswered questions. Before diving in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest cold case stories. Olivia stepped out of her vehicle, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders against the morning chill. She had come to Savannah to review old police files, hoping that years of accumulated experience and a fresh perspective might uncover something that previous investigators had missed. She walked briskly toward the small brick building that housed the cold case archives, her heels clicking against the pavement, echoing in the empty morning streets. Inside, the smell of aged paper and dust filled the air. Olivia greeted the clerk with a nod and moved toward the shelves where the Franklin case files were stored. She ran her fingers over the folders, each labeled with dates and names, each representing a life disrupted and a mystery unsolved. Pulling out the file for Mandy Franklin, she carefully laid it on the table. Photographs of Mandy, smiling and radiant in summer dresses, spilled out. Olivia's eyes softened. The girl's face, frozen in time at 21, seemed to demand justice. Meanwhile, in Baton Rouge, Detective Ethan Caldwell was beginning his day in a similar fashion. He stood over a stack of files recently unearthed from the evidence room at the State Police Archives. Among them was the file for Naomi Rivers, a 19-year-old who had gone missing in 1982, her body later found in a drainage canal on the outskirts of the city. Ethan carefully opened the folder, scanning witness statements, photographs, and lab reports. Naomi's case had also gone cold, despite multiple leads at the time. Something about it nagged at him, a sense of unease that a pattern might exist, one that had eluded investigators for years. The two detectives had been in touch via phone over the past few months, collaborating across state lines to see if there was any connection between unsolved disappearances in the Southeast. There had been murmurs, small similarities that, taken individually, seemed coincidental, the ages of the victims, the timing of the disappearances, even certain details in the witness statements. But as Olivia and Ethan began laying the cases side by side, a chilling possibility emerged. These might not be isolated incidents. Someone might have been methodically targeting young women for nearly a decade. Olivia's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She looked up to see Ethan entering the archive room, a man in his early 40s with a determined expression and a hint of weariness around his eyes. He carried a coffee cup in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "You must be Harper," he said, extending his hand. "Caldwell," she replied, shaking it. "I've been going through the Franklin file for a while. It's disturbing. She was such a bright girl." Ethan nodded, placing his folder on the table. "Naomi's file reads the same way. It's like the girls vanished from the world entirely, leaving nothing but questions and heartbreak." They sat down together, spreading out the files from Savannah and Baton Rouge. Olivia's fingers traced the lines of Mandy's last known movements. A note from a neighbor mentioned seeing her walking home from the library the afternoon she disappeared, and another indicated that she had mentioned plans to meet someone about a tutoring job. Nothing in the file connected directly to Naomi. Yet Ethan's notes from Baton Rouge showed a similar pattern. A young woman, quiet and unassuming, following her daily routine, and then gone. "The timing," Olivia said slowly. "Mandy in 1976, Naomi in 1982. There are a few others in between that fit the same profile. Young women in their late teens or early 20s, isolated, no immediate family nearby when they vanished. The disappearances happened during the summer months or early fall. There's a window here, a pattern." Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "That's what I've been worried about. Someone's been moving slowly, carefully, almost like they want to avoid detection entirely, and we're only just starting to see it now." As they spoke, both were aware of a subtle yet nagging detail in the old case notes. Mentions of a man seen near both crime scenes, described as unremarkable or easily overlooked. His name never appeared in the original investigations, but Ethan and Olivia had started hearing whispers in the files. Whispers of a local man who seemed to be present in the background of multiple incidents, always a shadow in someone else's memory, always unaccounted for. They called him Malcolm Trent. Not a name on any criminal record, not a name in any official report, but one that now emerged as a thread weaving through the darkness. "Trent," Olivia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do we have any confirmed sightings?" "Nothing official," Ethan replied. "Just mentions in witness statements, passing references in old interviews. But the pattern's there. And the more I dig, the more I'm convinced we're looking at the same person. One man, spanning nearly a decade, moving through the southeast without leaving a trace. We need to speak with the families, see if they remember anything at all that might have been dismissed at the time." Their first visit was to Savannah, to Mandy Franklin's mother, Eleanor. Olivia and Ethan drove through the historic district, the car moving slowly over the cobblestone streets. Eleanor Franklin lived in a modest home just a few blocks from where Mandy had grown up. The house had aged gracefully, with a front porch lined with flower pots and wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze. Eleanor answered the door, her hands trembling slightly. She was a woman in her late 40s, though grief had aged her beyond her years. When she saw the detectives, she welcomed them in with a quiet dignity, though her eyes betrayed the weight of decades of unanswered questions. "Mrs. Franklin," Olivia began gently, "we've been reviewing Mandy's case. I know it's been many years, but we're hoping to gather any information you might still have. Anything you remember? Anything that seemed unusual at the time?" Eleanor motioned them inside, leading them to a living room filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, and Mandy's belongings carefully preserved. "I've gone over everything 1,000 times," she said softly. "I never stopped looking for her, never stopped hoping, but after all these years, I don't know what more I can tell you." Olivia handed her a photograph of Mandy from her high school graduation. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she ran her fingers over the image. "She was so full of life," she whispered, "always laughing, always helping everyone. I don't understand how someone could do this to her." Then stepped in carefully. "We believe there may have been someone who targeted her specifically, someone who has done this before and may have continued afterward." Eleanor's hand shook as she clutched her daughter's photograph. "A pattern? Oh, God!" From Savannah, they moved to Baton Rouge to visit Naomi Rivers' mother, Diane Park. Diane had spent the last 3 years living alone in a quiet neighborhood, having moved from the city center after the media attention surrounding Naomi's case. She met Olivia and Ethan at the door, her eyes wary but curious. "Detectives, please," she said, stepping aside to let them in. "I've read your letters. I don't know what more I can give you, but if it helps, if it finally gives my daughter justice, then I'll do whatever I can." Inside, the home was sparse, yet warm. Diane had kept mementos of Naomi's life, a small bookshelf filled with favorite novels, photographs on the mantel, and a quilt Naomi had made in high school. Olivia approached the photographs slowly, noticing the same light in Naomi's eyes that had been captured in Mandy's images, a brightness that now existed only in memory. "We're looking for anything unusual," Olivia said gently. "Anything that might help us understand what happened." Diane nodded, her voice catching. She was planning to meet someone the day she disappeared, someone from the store where she worked part-time. "I never met him, but Naomi mentioned his name once. I can't remember exactly. It was fleeting. Something didn't feel right about him. But I didn't know. I didn't know what she was hiding." Ethan took careful notes. "You're not at fault," he reassured her. "It's common for victims to not tell everything. We're here to uncover the truth now." As the detectives left Baton Rouge, a shared unease hung over them. The threads between the two cases were tightening, and Malcolm Trent's presence, though unseen, was a shadow stretching across their path. Both knew they were only beginning to scratch the surface, and the realization that they might be tracking a single killer who had remained unpunished for nearly a decade weighed heavily on them. Back at their respective offices, Olivia and Ethan continued to map out timelines, cross-referencing witness statements, minor details, and locations. They began to see the pattern more clearly: the cities, the neighborhoods, the seasonal timing, the victim profiles. Trent's presence was subtle, almost imperceptible in the files, but the hints were there. A name, a car description, fleeting memories of neighbors. Someone who could blend in, appear harmless, and leave devastation in his wake. Late one night, Olivia sat alone in the archive room, poring over Mandy's case notes. The streetlights outside flickered, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. She held a photograph of Mandy in her hands, a small smile frozen on the young woman's face. The thought of Malcolm Trent, a man unknown to the public but intimately tied to so much pain, made her stomach tighten. Meanwhile, Ethan reviewed Naomi's file in Baton Rouge, the fan humming quietly above his desk. He read the statements aloud to himself, hoping the sound might trigger a connection. He paused on a line written by a witness who had seen Naomi talking to a man outside the hardware store. A man who seemed to appear in other towns, under different descriptions, yet leaving the same cold imprint. Both detectives, though miles apart, were thinking the same thing. They had found a pattern, and they had found the first thread in unraveling a story that spanned nearly a decade. They needed each other's insight to see the full picture. A phone call later that evening cemented the partnership. Olivia and Ethan would collaborate closely, combining Savannah and Baton Rouge, tracking Trent from town to town, trying to bring clarity to the terror he left behind. As the first part of their investigation drew to a close, a subtle tension hung in the air. The victims' families were reeling from revisited memories. The detectives were piecing together a complex puzzle, and Malcolm Trent, unseen, almost mythic, remained a dark figure looming over the southeast, a ghost whose actions had shaped lives for years. The next steps would take them deeper into the past, closer to the secrets that had been hidden, and inevitably toward the confrontation that would begin to bring truth and justice to those who had waited far too long. The first hint that something more sinister might be unfolding came in the late summer of 1985. Olivia Harper sat in the cramped Little Rock Police Department archives, surrounded by dusty manila folders and fading photographs. The air smelled faintly of mildew and copier toner, a combination that brought back memories of countless hours spent chasing cold leads. She flipped through the files of Vanessa Cortez, a 17-year-old girl who had disappeared from her neighborhood near the River Market area. Her body had been discovered days later, hidden in a clearing along the Arkansas River. Her life cut tragically short. The crime had been brutal, yet the investigation had left many unanswered questions. Something about the case gnawed at Olivia, a pattern she couldn't yet articulate. Ethan Caldwell arrived, his leather satchel thumping against the metal table as he set it down. "You called me in on this one?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Olivia's restless energy. "I think there's more to this than we realized," Olivia said, tapping the photograph of Vanessa on the table. "Look at the location of the crime scene. Look at her profile. There's something eerily familiar about it." Ethan leaned in, studying the details. "Another case like Naomi Rivers in Baton Rouge?" he asked, referencing the unresolved file they had recently reviewed. "Exactly," Olivia replied. "Both victims were young women, bright, caring, and in quiet neighborhoods. Both were taken without any real sign of motive. I think we might be looking at a pattern." Ethan nodded slowly. "And you want to see if this is the work of a serial offender?" Olivia gave a curt nod. "If so, we need to start tracking his movements before anyone else gets hurt." That afternoon, the two detectives visited Vanessa's mother, Rosa Cortez, in her modest Little Rock home. The living room smelled faintly of baked bread and old furniture polish. Rosa's hands trembled as she handed over a photograph of Vanessa, her smiling face captured in a school portrait from just weeks before she was killed. "My little girl, she was full of life," Rosa said, her voice breaking. "She helped everyone she could. And then one night she was gone, taken, and we never got answers." Olivia and Ethan listened in silence, letting the grief hang in the air. They didn't interrupt. They simply allowed Rosa to tell the story, knowing that the emotional weight would provide insights into the kind of person Vanessa had been, something the investigators needed to remember beyond the crime itself. As they left Little Rock, the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the riverfront in soft shades of gold. Olivia glanced at Ethan. If this is the same person connected to the cases in Savannah and Baton Rouge, we're looking at a mobile offender. Someone moving through the South with terrifying precision. Ethan's jaw tightened. Mobile, methodical, and careful, which means he's probably already planning the next move. 5 years later, Knoxville, Tennessee, became the backdrop for another tragedy. Leah Monroe, a 19-year-old university student, vanished one evening after leaving a library study session. Olivia and Ethan were called to the scene, a narrow street lined with red brick townhouses and the golden glow of street lamps. The air smelled of autumn leaves and damp pavement. Leah's apartment was tidy, her textbooks still stacked neatly on her desk, her journal open to a page where she had scribbled notes about an upcoming lecture. Her father, Ethan Monroe, a retired firefighter with hands scarred from years of service, met the detectives at the door. His expression was a mix of disbelief and controlled fury. She was a bright girl, always helping others, he said. She wanted to be a nurse. She cared more about people than anyone I've ever known. And now... He trailed off, his voice cracking. Olivia placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We're going to do everything we can to find out who did this. We're tracking patterns and we've seen similar cases before. Ethan Caldwell took notes quietly, the pen moving across the pad almost automatically. Tell us about the night she disappeared, he prompted. She said she'd meet a classmate for coffee, then head home, Ethan Monroe replied. She never made it. I tried to call her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By the time I got there, the neighbors had seen a man loitering near the library. But they didn't get a clear description. Olivia exchanged a glance with Ethan. Another missing girl. Another young woman taken without a trace. The chilling pattern that had begun to emerge in Little Rock and Baton Rouge was now unmistakable. Meanwhile, Dr. Sophie Langston, a criminal psychologist based in Birmingham, Alabama, reviewed the case files Olivia and Ethan had sent. She pored over the records late into the night, her study illuminated by a single lamp. The profiles of the victims revealed striking similarities. All young women, often involved in community work or school activities, all physically fit and socially engaged, and all living in smaller southern cities. Their disappearances and subsequent murders bore a signature consistency, precise, controlled, and executed with a disturbing calm. Sophie typed up a preliminary profile. She suggested the offender was likely someone from the South, familiar with the local towns, and mobile enough to avoid detection across state lines. She speculated that he might have been keeping meticulous records of his crimes, perhaps even reliving them mentally, which would explain the pattern's consistency. When Olivia and Ethan met with Sophie in Mobile in 1995, after the initial investigation into Hannah Pierce's disappearance, they felt the weight of her insights immediately. The city was a humid September morning, the Gulf of Mexico sending warm air through the streets. Hannah, 18, had been seen leaving her part-time job at a downtown cafe. Her apartment smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla. Her best friend reported that she had seemed anxious in the days leading up to her disappearance, mentioning a man who had been watching her. Watching, Sophie said, leaning back in her chair as they pored over photographs and statements. That aligns with what we know about the other cases. He selects his victims based on daily routines, familiarizes himself with their habits, and then strikes when he can ensure control. These aren't random killings. They're planned, almost ritualized. Ethan frowned. And each time he moves on without leaving traces. How do you stop someone who's always one step ahead? You observed the pattern, Sophie replied, tapping her finger against the case files. Patterns rarely lie. If we can anticipate the next location or victim profile, we can intervene before another life is taken. The team traveled extensively over the following months. In Little Rock, they revisited Vanessa Cortez's last known routes, checking security footage and re-interviewing neighbors. In Knoxville, they pored over Leah Monroe's campus interactions, cross-referencing her class schedules, commuting routes, and friends' accounts. In Mobile, they examined Hannah Pierce's part-time work, her weekend routines, and the small local events she attended. Each investigation offered clues, fragments that began forming the larger puzzle. Family interviews were especially challenging. Rosa Cortez's grief in Little Rock was palpable. She alternated between quiet sobs and moments of sharp, bitter anger. Ethan Monroe in Knoxville wrestled with guilt over not recognizing the danger Leah faced, replaying every interaction in his mind. Naomi Park, mother of Naomi Rivers from Baton Rouge, remained stoic outwardly, but spoke of the lingering trauma her daughter's disappearance had inflicted on the entire family. Olivia and Ethan understood these were not just cases, they were living scars etched across generations. As the investigations continued, subtle threads began to surface, hints of Malcolm Trent's presence. In Little Rock, a neighbor remembered a tall man with sandy hair watching Vanessa from across the street days before her disappearance. In Knoxville, a janitor described a man lingering near the library, wearing a dark jacket despite the late spring heat. In Mobile, a security guard recalled an unassuming man, blending into the cafe crowd, yet somehow always in line with Hannah's movements. None could confirm identities, but Olivia noted each observation carefully in her growing timeline. By the spring of 1996, patterns were becoming unmistakable. Olivia, Ethan, and Sophie gathered in Birmingham for a strategy session. The city's streets hummed with the soft buzz of morning traffic. Sophie spread maps across the table, plotting each known incident on a map of the southern United States. Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, she said, tapping points with her pen. He's moving in a predictable pattern. Distance, timing, victim profile, they're all consistent. If he continues at this pace, we can anticipate the next potential location. Olivia frowned. But he's unpredictable in his method. Sometimes he's careful, sometimes sloppy. Each murder leaves a different signature. That's part of his psychological profile, Sophie replied. It's a display of control. He wants to challenge us to see if he can remain ahead. But the consistency of victim type and geographic progression gives us leverage. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion lining his face. And we're talking about multiple states, multiple jurisdictions. How do we coordinate without tipping him off? We build a coalition, Sophie said firmly. Local departments, FBI task force if necessary. We're going to create a network that shares information in real time. That's the only way to stay ahead. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Ethan put this plan into action. They revisited each crime scene, collecting evidence previously overlooked. The team re-examined photographs, autopsy reports, witness statements, and minor details that had seemed insignificant at the time. Olivia's journal notes became increasingly detailed, documenting even the smallest anomalies. Footprints, vehicle tracks, the peculiar arrangement of items at crime scenes. In Little Rock, Rosa Cortez sat in the living room, watching Olivia organize notes on the coffee table. "You really think you can catch him?" she asked quietly, her eyes wary. Olivia paused, looking up at her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know we won't stop trying. Vanessa's story, Leah's, Hannah's, they deserve that much." Rosa nodded, her lips trembling. I just want to know he can't hurt anyone else." As summer turned into fall, the team began noticing the psychological imprint Malcolm Trent left at each scene. There were subtle clues, objects slightly out of place, signs of surveillance, the way he staged the victim's personal items. Sophie emphasized that these weren't mistakes, they were intentional, markers of his ego and control. It was during one of these reviews that Olivia realized something. "He's learning," she said, tapping her finger against the map. "Each time we get close, he moves further. But the pattern isn't broken. He's still following the same route, hitting the same types of victims. If we can predict the next move, we have a chance to stop him." Ethan nodded slowly, staring out the window at the fading orange horizon over Mobile Bay. "And we will," he said firmly, one step at a time. By the end of 1995, Hannah Pierce's case remained unresolved, but the groundwork had been laid for what would become a multi-state task force. Olivia and Ethan, alongside Sophie, had established timelines, victim profiles, and geographic patterns. Families of the victims, though scarred, began to see that the investigators were relentless in their pursuit of truth. Emotional interviews, careful documentation, and subtle insights into Malcolm Trent's psychology had begun to form a comprehensive picture of the threat they faced. The southern states were awakening to a hidden danger, a serial predator whose meticulous planning and mobility had allowed him to evade capture for nearly 2 decades. But the detectives were closing in, piecing together a puzzle that stretched across 5 states, knowing that each new revelation could bring them closer to stopping him, or uncovering horrors still hidden in the shadows. Olivia Harper closed her notebook one evening in Mobile, the streets quiet outside the window. "We're seeing the pattern," she said softly. "It's clear now. He's targeting young women, moving south to north, west to east, leaving a trail we can follow. We just need to be patient and thorough." Ethan leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning the maps she had meticulously drawn. "And the families. They deserve answers," Olivia said firmly. "And we're going to give them every one of them." As the city lights of Mobile flickered against the darkening sky, the team knew one thing. The next decade would be crucial. The serial killer had left his mark, but now, armed with patterns, profiles, and determination, Olivia, Ethan, and Sophie were ready to confront the path of destruction he had carved through the South. Each case, each story, and each victim brought them closer to the man who had eluded justice for so long, and closer to a confrontation that would test their skills, resolve, and endurance in ways they could not yet imagine. Olivia Harper sat at her desk in the cold case division, the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the room. Her eyes were fixed on the board in front of her, a mosaic of photographs, maps, and case files that stretched across the wall. Every picture represented a young woman whose life had been stolen. Mandy Franklin, Naomi Rivers, Vanessa Cortez, Leah Monroe, Hannah Pierce. And now, more recent names had begun to populate the board. Felicia Chen, Gabrielle Reed. Olivia rubbed her temples and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Years of investigation had culminated in this. A pattern had emerged, subtle but undeniable. Malcolm Trent's trail spanned decades, southern states, and the lives of countless families. Ethan Caldwell entered the room, carrying 2 cups of coffee. His tired eyes scanned the wall, the corners of his mouth twitching into a half-smile. "I see you've been staring at that board all morning," he said, placing 1 cup beside hers. "It's like a macabre jigsaw puzzle that keeps getting bigger." "It's worse than that," Olivia replied quietly. "Every time we add a new victim, it's like the puzzle rearranges itself. There's a rhythm to these murders, Ethan, and I think we're finally starting to see it." They didn't hear Dr. Sophie Langston enter at first. The criminal profiler moved silently behind them, notebook in hand, her keen gaze already scanning the board. "You're correct, Detective Harper," Sophie said softly. "The killings are consistent in both method and geography. The younger victims, the southern cities, the time gaps, they're almost like a pattern left deliberately for us to see, if we're willing to look closely enough." Olivia turned and nodded. "Sophie, perfect timing. We're about to go over Felicia Chen's case. I want your input on how Trent's psychology could connect the old and new." Sophie set her notebook on the desk. "Let's start with location. Lexington, Kentucky. 2000. Felicia was 22. Same age range as the earlier victims. Same signature behaviors observed, the initial approach, the obsession, the calculated escalation. And notice, this is the first victim that ties him beyond state lines since Hannah Pierce." Ethan leaned forward, sipping his coffee. "You mean Trent didn't stick to Alabama after 95? He's moving north?" "Yes," Sophie replied. "And it's deliberate. He's testing boundaries, varying his method slightly to avoid detection, but the core behavior remains consistent. The letters and journals we recovered hint at a man obsessed not just with control, but with a personal mythology. He believes he is correcting the world in some sick, moralistic sense." Olivia nodded. "Let's bring up the Chen files." She swiveled her chair toward a projector and displayed Felicia Chen's case records. Photographs of the young woman smiled up from the screen, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in a high school graduation picture. Felicia had been a nursing student, described by friends and family as compassionate, intelligent, and quietly ambitious. Her mother, Diane Chen, reported Felicia missing after she didn't return from an evening study session at the library, Olivia explained. Her body was found 2 weeks later, the same signature markings Trent used in prior cases. Sophie frowned, scanning the digital files. Notice the timing, almost exactly 5 years after the previous victim. And location choice, a city with a significant college population, much like Baton Rouge. He's patterning victims based on environment as well as personal traits. This isn't random. Ethan sighed. Every time I see these faces, I wonder, how many more were overlooked? How many families never got answers? That's why we have to be meticulous, Sophie said firmly. We cannot afford oversight. Every letter, journal entry, police report, and DNA sample could be the thread that ties this entire web together. The following day, Olivia and Ethan traveled to Lexington to revisit Felicia's crime scene. The apartment complex where she had lived had been partially renovated, but the courtyard where she had last been seen remained familiar. A small group of local officers greeted them. Diane Chen, a fragile figure in her 50s, waited anxiously near the entrance. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she saw Olivia approaching. Detective Harper, Diane began, her voice shaking. I don't know why I agreed to this. Seeing this place again, it's like reopening the wound. Olivia gently placed a hand on her shoulder. I know it's difficult, Miss Chen, but reviewing the scene might help us understand patterns we missed before, and maybe prevent more victims in the future. Felicia's story matters, and so does your voice in it. They walked slowly through the courtyard, Ethan taking photographs for reference. Olivia knelt near a small flower bed where Felicia had reportedly often sat to read. The soil was freshly turned, a small memorial plant placed in her honor. Diane knelt beside the flower bed, tears falling freely. She loved this spot, Diane whispered. She said it reminded her of home, even when she was away at college. After the scene visit, they returned to the Lexington Police Archives. Liam Sutter, the forensic analyst, joined them. He had been compiling DNA samples from previous cases, running them against modern databases to find connections Trent had attempted to obscure. Detectives, Liam began, spreading out printed reports. We've got a potential breakthrough. I've run Felicia's DNA against older evidence. Mandy Franklin, Naomi Rivers, Vanessa Cortez, Leah Monroe, Hannah Pierce, and there are partial matches that confirm the same biological material pattern. It's consistent with a single perpetrator over decades. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. So, Trent's been leaving traces all along. Yes, Liam said. And the journals we found, handwritten, often disguised as personal musings, detail his obsessive tracking of victims. He's kept meticulous notes on behaviors, locations, even family histories. This is what allows us to establish him as a serial offender rather than isolated incidents. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the discovery heavy on his shoulders. And the families, have they met yet? Olivia shook her head. Not yet, but they need to. The psychological trauma is generational. Diane Chen carries guilt, Naomi Park still struggles with unanswered questions from the 1980s, and Rosa Cortez has lived with fear for decades. We'll arrange a meeting soon once we have more concrete connections. The next stop was Richmond, Virginia, for the Gabrielle Reed case. Gabrielle had been a 24-year-old librarian, known for her quiet demeanor and community involvement. Richmond police records revealed little at the time, as Trent had left a few traces, but modern forensic efforts allowed Liam and Sophie to reconstruct the night of her murder. At the Reed family home, Olivia and Ethan met Harold Chen, who had been a close friend of Gabrielle's family. Detectives, Harold began, voice tight. I can't believe this is still happening. Gabrielle, she was so careful, so smart. How could anyone like this exist for decades without being caught? Sophie knelt beside him. The man responsible is meticulous, Harold. He studies his victims, plans carefully, and avoids patterns law enforcement could catch until now. And with modern tools, we're finally connecting the dots. Harold's hands trembled as he clutched a faded photograph of Gabrielle. I just want justice. I want people to know she mattered. You're going to get that, Olivia reassured him. Her life, her memory will be honored, and we're finally close to stopping him from hurting anyone else. Back in Richmond, Liam cross-referenced Trent's journals with Gabrielle's schedule and known associates. Look at this, he said, pointing to a series of entries. Trent mentioned cities, years, and even types of victims, women involved in education, libraries, or service-oriented roles. It's a compounding pattern. Sophie examined the entries closely. He's fixated not only on the victims themselves, but on the potential influence their lives could have had. He's punishing the world, in his twisted logic, for what he perceives as wrongs or imperfections. That obsession makes him incredibly dangerous, but also predictable once we understand it. Olivia added, and it explains the movement across states. He's chasing opportunities where he sees ideal victims, while avoiding places where he's known or tracked. That's why the southern states were his hunting ground, and why we see the escalation into Kentucky and Virginia. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. All these families, they've lived in fear, grief, and confusion for decades. If this man can be stopped, maybe we can start giving them back pieces of their lives. They returned to the cold case division to consolidate findings. Olivia arranged a virtual meeting with the families, Diane Chen, Rosa Cortez, Naomi Park, and Harold Chen, facilitated by Sophie. The families hesitated at first, the emotional weight almost unbearable, but Olivia spoke softly. We're not here to relive trauma, but to bring understanding. The past doesn't have to control the present anymore. These meetings can help start healing. Through the conference, Diane shared her grief over Felicia. Rosa detailed her struggle with Vanessa's disappearance, and Naomi voiced years of unanswered questions about her sister's case. Harold spoke for Gabrielle, recounting small joys, hopes, and the young woman's unfulfilled potential. Sophie interjected with careful analysis. What we're seeing is generational trauma. The psychological effects extend beyond the immediate family, touching communities and friendships. But identifying the perpetrator, linking all cases, and understanding his motivations are the first steps in breaking that cycle. After the session, Olivia and Ethan sat back, exhausted but focused. This is what we've been working toward, Olivia said. Connecting cases, linking victims, preparing for the next step, catching Trent, ending the cycle. Liam entered, holding a folder of newly analyzed forensic evidence. Detectives, we've got confirmation. DNA matches, journal correlations, and consistent victimology across decades. Malcolm Trent is responsible for every known case from Savannah to Richmond. And there may be more. Olivia exhaled sharply. It's official. He's a serial killer spanning nearly 30 years. Now we have proof to bring every piece together. Ethan shook his head, staring at the evidence. And the letters, the obsessive detail. This is the mind of someone who's been planning, documenting, and fantasizing for decades. We have to be ready for what we'll find next. Sophie nodded. This is where criminal profiling becomes crucial. Understanding Trent's behaviors, triggers, and potential next moves allows law enforcement to anticipate and prevent further tragedies. The three investigators spent the night organizing reports, cross-referencing dates, and preparing for the eventual confrontation with Trent. Even in exhaustion, Olivia knew one truth. The story wasn't over. Each victim's memory demanded justice. Each family needed closure, and every piece of evidence was a key to ending a decades-long nightmare. By the time the sun rose over Richmond, the outlines of a new phase in the investigation were clear. Trent had left a trail, one that had spanned states and generations, but for the first time, law enforcement had the tools, knowledge, and determination to finally follow it to its conclusion. Olivia looked at the wall of photographs again. Faces of young women stolen too soon. Mandy, Naomi, Vanessa, Leah, Hannah, Felicia, Gabrielle. She whispered their names softly, one by one. Each life mattered, each memory mattered, and for the first time, she felt hope that the truth could finally emerge, and families could begin to heal. And in the shadows, Malcolm Trent's carefully hidden life was about to be unmasked, his decades-long obsession finally exposed. The hunt was intensifying, and the investigators knew the next years would bring challenges, revelations, and the ultimate confrontation with a man who had evaded justice for far too long. The city stirred around them, oblivious to the truth about to surface. Decades of pain, unanswered questions, and silent grief were all converging, and the long shadow of Malcolm Trent's crimes was finally beginning to unravel. The investigators knew the next phase would be the most intense. Every clue, every connection, every haunted memory leading them toward the final confrontation. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds of Charleston General Hospital, casting muted stripes across the worn linoleum floors. Olivia Harper adjusted her badge as she stepped into the room where Isabel Kim lay under a pale blue blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. It had been 5 years since the last breakthrough in the Trent cases, but the haunting knowledge of unresolved murders had never left the investigators. Isabel's mother, Rosa Kim, stood beside the bed, her hands wringing a handkerchief with a nervous energy that betrayed decades of suppressed fear. Detective Harper knelt slightly, keeping her voice low and even. "Rosa, we're here to support Isabel and your family. We've learned things about Malcolm Trent that we believe may bring answers to questions you've carried for years." Rosa's eyes brimmed with tears, and she nodded silently. Ethan Caldwell joined Olivia, his presence solid and reassuring. He laid a gentle hand on Rosa's shoulder. "We know this is frightening, but you're not alone in this." Over the next hour, Olivia and Ethan walked Rosa through the case files, the careful accumulation of evidence that spanned decades. From Savannah to Baton Rouge, Little Rock to Lexington, each tragedy had seemed isolated, but patterns emerged when examined collectively. Each victim was a young woman, targeted in southern cities with growing confidence and cruelty. Isabel's case fit this pattern, and with forensic advancements they now had the tools to connect the dots that once seemed impossible. Isabel, though weak, listened intently as her mother absorbed every word. The weight of decades of unanswered questions seemed to press down on the small hospital room, yet there was a palpable sense of cautious hope in the air. 3 days later, in Jacksonville, Florida, Veronica Delgado's case came into focus. The files revealed chilling similarities to Isabel's murder. Olivia and Ethan pored over evidence photographs and notes, noting the careful planning Trent had employed. Veronica's family, Daniel and Sofia Delgado, met the detectives in their modest living room. Photographs of Veronica at various ages adorned the mantelpiece, smiling in school plays, at family gatherings, each image a stark reminder of the life lost. Daniel's hands trembled as he recounted the night Veronica disappeared. It was just normal. Nothing seemed wrong. She went to her part-time job and she never came home. Sophia sat quietly, clutching a folded letter Veronica had sent home shortly before her disappearance. Olivia took the letter carefully, noting the tone of fear subtly present in the cursive writing. Meanwhile, Malcolm Trent's health was deteriorating rapidly. Once a commanding figure in the criminal world, he now existed mostly in shadowed rooms, shuffling slowly with the aid of a cane, his speech halting and fragmented. Olivia had arranged for visits with Trent under strict supervision, aware that the fragile man held the key to decades of unsolved murders. In a quiet nursing home in Tampa, the team entered a room suffused with the sterile scent of antiseptic. Malcolm sat in a wheelchair, staring blankly at a framed photograph on the wall, an image of one of his earliest victims, a cruel reminder of the sins he had carried for over 40 years. Olivia approached cautiously. "Mr. Trent, we need your cooperation. There are families waiting for closure. There are names that have been lost to time, and you can help us restore them." Malcolm's eyes flickered, a mix of confusion and fleeting recognition passing across his face. He muttered something inaudible, his voice frail. Ethan leaned closer. "We know it's difficult, but this is your chance to set the record straight, to unburden yourself before it's too late." For hours, the conversations were fragmented, with Trent slipping in and out of lucidity. Yet, through the haze, patterns emerged. Hidden journals, old letters, and detailed notes revealed not only his crimes, but the careful concealment orchestrated by family members who sought to preserve the family name at any cost. The detectives learned of accomplices who had enabled Trent, intentionally or through fear, and the cascading consequences that had affected generations of victims and their families. Each revelation was met with a mixture of horror and reluctant understanding from the families present. By 2018, the final victim, Meredith Sloan, had become a central focus. The investigation was intense, drawing Olivia and Ethan across Tampa to revisit old crime scenes, interview witnesses, and analyze forensic evidence with a precision previously impossible. Meredith's case had been obscured by intentional misdirection, but with the accumulation of decades of data, the patterns aligned unmistakably with Trent's history. Olivia sat in the quiet confines of the Tampa archives, surrounded by boxes of evidence, her eyes scanning the meticulously organized files. Ethan, every detail, every small act of violence, every attempted cover-up, points to the same man. Trent never stopped. He just moved south, changing cities to avoid detection. The emotional toll on the families was immense. Rosa Kim, Daniel, and Sofia Delgado, and the Sloans experienced the revelation of shared tragedy. The investigators orchestrated sensitive meetings between families, ensuring that the emotional exchanges were constructive rather than re-traumatizing. Ethan Monroe and Harold Chen, whose families had been connected to earlier cases, began tentative dialogues with the newer victims' relatives, sharing grief, anger, and the strange relief of finally confronting the truth. These intergenerational interactions highlighted the ripple effects of Malcolm Trent's crimes, underscoring how one man's obsession could cast shadows across decades. At the nursing home in Tampa, Olivia and Ethan finally confronted Trent with the accumulated evidence, a mixture of medical records, photographs, and personal writings. "Malcolm," Olivia began, voice steady, "we have irrefutable proof of your actions, and we know about every crime you committed, every family you impacted. This is your chance to speak, to explain, to acknowledge the pain you caused." Malcolm's lips trembled, and he slumped further into his chair. He murmured fragments of confessions, barely audible but undeniable. I didn't mean to, but I couldn't stop. She... Ethan listened quietly, recording every word, while Olivia observed the subtle shifts in his demeanor, noting which memories caused the most evident guilt and fear. Meanwhile, the families were allowed into adjacent rooms, where they could confront the emotional truth without the immediate presence of the killer. Conversations flowed, questions, accusations, and the long-suppressed grief of decades. In these moments, it became clear that the survivors of Trent's reign of terror had been carrying multiple layers of trauma, from the immediate loss of their loved ones, the obfuscation by Trent's family, and the broader societal inability to recognize a pattern until modern forensics had intervened. One evening, after a particularly exhaustive interview, Olivia and Ethan reviewed the accumulated material in their makeshift office. They pieced together the timeline with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, mapping Trent's movements from Charleston to Jacksonville to Tampa. Forensic evidence had finally provided the connective tissue between cases, including fingerprints, DNA, and the killer's own writings. Behavioral analysis from Dr. Sophie Langston confirmed the serial nature of the crimes, highlighting Trent's obsessive tendencies and his strategic relocations to evade law enforcement. In the quiet of the Tampa nursing home, Malcolm Trent's health continued to decline. He experienced moments of clarity interspersed with confusion. In one lucid moment, he requested that his journals be handed to the detectives, acknowledging that the truth must be told. "Take them," he whispered. "Everything. I want it known." Olivia accepted the journals with a solemn nod, recognizing the symbolic closure they represented, a final surrender of the hidden narratives that had haunted so many families for decades. The families gathered one final time in Tampa, a private meeting arranged under the guidance of Olivia and Ethan. The room was tense, emotions raw. The descendants of Trent and the victims came face to face, bridging gaps created by secrecy and fear. Daniel Delgado, his voice trembling, asked a question that had haunted him for years. "Why did your family protect him?" Malcolm Trent's frail voice croaked in reply. "Fear, shame. I carried it too long. It destroyed us. I couldn't stop it." There was no justification, only the sobering reality that the sins of the past had cascading consequences. The culmination of Part 4 occurred in a small, dimly lit room in the nursing home, where Olivia, Ethan, and Dr. Langston conducted a final debriefing with Malcolm Trent. The confessions were painstakingly documented, tying together all cases from Charleston to Tampa. Forensic evidence corroborated the confessions, closing decades-old investigative gaps. The detectives ensured that each family received complete records, photographs, and copies of Trent's journals, emphasizing transparency and accountability. As the investigators left the nursing home, the Florida sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The air was heavy with the weight of resolved mysteries, yet there remained a subtle promise of peace. Families had begun the process of healing. Connections between previously isolated victims' descendants had formed, and Trent's final admissions had offered the closure that had long eluded everyone involved. Even as Trent's health waned, Olivia and Ethan recognized the broader implications of their work. The careful documentation, the cross-state investigations, and the emotional labor required to bring decades of suffering to a resolution served as a blueprint for future cold case units. In the quiet of their hotel room that evening, they reviewed the cases one last time before heading back to headquarters. "Every detail, every decision matters," Ethan said quietly. Olivia nodded, staring at the pile of case files. And sometimes the truth doesn't just free the victims, it frees the families too. The first crisp days of January 2020 arrived in Mobile, Alabama, carrying a quiet sense of reflection over the city. Detective Olivia Harper sat at her desk in the newly renovated Cold Case Division office, the soft hum of fluorescent lights above her blending with the distant sounds of traffic outside. She had spent nearly a decade following the threads of Malcolm Trent's crimes, from Savannah to Tampa, stitching together a narrative that had haunted multiple families for decades. Now, with Trent gone and all confessions fully documented, the focus had shifted toward the victims, their legacies, and the families who had suffered in silence for far too long. Ethan Caldwell pushed open the office door, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Morning, Harper. You look like you've aged 10 years overnight." Olivia gave a small smile, rubbing her eyes. "Feels like it, Ethan, but we're finally here. Every case tied up, every family given answers. It's surreal." "Surreal," he repeated, lowering his voice. "And it's about to get emotional. The memorial services, the scholarships, the dedications, it's going to bring a lot of those old wounds back up. But it's the right time, the right way to honor them." Olivia nodded, thinking of Isabel Kim, Veronica Delgado, Meredith Sloan, and the countless others who had been stolen from the world too soon. The first major event would be held in Charleston, South Carolina, where a small refurbished church awaited the families of the victims. The city had agreed to host the service, providing both space and community support for what promised to be a moving occasion. By the time the day arrived, the church was filled with soft chatter, floral arrangements, and photographs of victims carefully displayed on easels. Families arrived from across the South, many who had not met before, drawn together by tragedy, perseverance, and now a sense of closure. Olivia and Ethan walked down the aisle quietly, noting the subtle exchanges of greeting between families who had shared grief but never crossed paths. Marcus Donovan, now fully retired but still a steady presence in their lives, stood near the back, hands clasped, watching with a mixture of pride and quiet emotion. The service began with soft organ music, a piece Margaret Thompson would have adored. Her life remembered in sound. A large projection screen displayed photographs of each victim. Mandy Franklin, Naomi Rivers, Vanessa Cortez, Leah Monroe, Hannah Pierce, Felicia Chen, Gabrielle Reed, Isabel Kim, Veronica Delgado, and Meredith Sloan. Each young woman's image was paired with a brief description, her passions, her dreams, the qualities that had made her beloved by family and friends. Olivia stepped up to the pulpit first, taking a deep breath. Her hands were steady, but her voice carried the weight of years spent seeking justice. We are gathered here today not only to remember lives taken too soon, but to celebrate the light these young women brought to the world. For decades, families lived with unanswered questions, whispered rumors, and the burden of fear. Today, we honor them, not as cases, not as statistics, but as vibrant, irreplaceable individuals whose lives mattered. Ethan followed, recounting the painstaking work of the cold case unit, the moments of doubt, the breakthroughs of forensic science, and the emotional toll that came with uncovering truths so deeply buried. "This work is not about glory," he said. "It is about restoring dignity, answering long-held questions, and providing some measure of peace to those left behind. For every photograph, every piece of evidence, every interview conducted, we remember why we persist, because the people behind these files deserve to be known, loved, and remembered." As the service continued, family members took turns speaking. Rosa Kim recounted her daughter Isabel's quiet courage, her laugh that filled rooms, and the unwavering compassion she had shown to everyone around her. Daniel and Sofia Delgado shared memories of Veronica, highlighting her adventurous spirit and the love she carried for her community. Each story revealed the human side of tragedy, turning mourning into celebration, grief into remembrance. The service culminated in the reading of letters and journals recovered from Malcolm Trent, revealing the impact he had wrought, but also the resilience of the families and the lives of the victims. Olivia handed a small folder to each family, a symbolic gesture of transparency and respect, containing detailed timelines, photographs, and confirmed records of all the cases. It was an acknowledgement that the world could no longer ignore the lives taken or the suffering endured. Following the church service, the attention turned to a park in Alabaster, Alabama, chosen for a public dedication of a memorial bench and a series of plaques honoring the victims. The bench was placed overlooking a playground, a nod to Margaret Thompson's dream of educating children, but it came to represent every young woman lost, watched over by the community that now remembered them. Families, local officials, and residents gathered, laying flowers, taking photographs, and reading the inscriptions aloud. Catherine Thompson, now in her late 50s, approached the podium with care. Her hand rested lightly on the bench, as if to bridge the decades between the past and the present. "This bench, these plaques, and this memorial are not just markers of loss," she said. "They are reminders of love, kindness, and the promise that no life taken in darkness will ever be forgotten. Today, we honor our daughters, sisters, cousins, and friends. We forgive the living for the sins of the past, and we pledge to carry forward the light they brought into our lives." Jennifer Hayes Coleman, representing the Hayes family who had long carried guilt for concealing knowledge of the crimes, stepped forward with a bouquet of white roses. "Though I never knew many of these women, my father's actions, or inaction, impacted so many lives. Today, we honor their memories and commit ourselves to supporting their families and ensuring their stories are told. It is my hope that by acknowledging the past, we can foster healing and understanding for the future." Families and community members moved in a quiet procession, placing flowers on the bench and reading each plaque aloud. The collective mourning became a shared act of remembrance, with tears, hugs, and whispered prayers filling the crisp autumn air. Olivia and Ethan observed from the sidelines, silently acknowledging the power of what they had accomplished, not only the justice delivered but the emotional closure now unfolding. As the day drew to a close, the dedication shifted to the University of Alabama, where a scholarship in honor of the victims was to be announced. Robert Hayes, whose family had previously carried a heavy burden for the crimes committed by his grandfather, had set aside funds for a perpetual scholarship supporting students in education and social work, fields aligned with the dreams and passions of many of the victims. The scholarship would serve as a lasting tribute, ensuring that the lives cut short would continue to inspire positive change. The ceremony was intimate, with university staff, students, and family members in attendance. Jennifer Hayes Coleman spoke on behalf of her father's wishes. "This scholarship is for students who demonstrate extraordinary kindness, compassion, and commitment to helping others. It is our way of honoring lives that were stolen too soon and creating a ripple effect of good in the world that these women would have wanted." A plaque was unveiled, bearing the names of the victims and the mission of the scholarship. Students in attendance were visibly moved, recognizing the responsibility and privilege of carrying forward such a legacy. Back at the Cold Case Division office, Olivia and Ethan reflected on the final steps of the investigation. The files were now fully closed, and every victim had a name, a story, and a memorial to ensure she would never be forgotten. Marcus Donovan, visiting for the first time since retirement, leaned back in a chair, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. "Never thought I'd see the day, Harper. Every file closed, every family heard, every story told. It's something else." Olivia looked out the window at the sunset, casting golden light across Mobile's skyline. "It's what this work is about. Not just catching a killer, not just evidence and prosecution. It's healing. It's justice in the human sense. Every memorial, every scholarship, every word shared is a small victory against the pain they suffered." Ethan nodded. "And the families, they're stronger now, united by shared grief, and the understanding that even in the darkest circumstances there can be reconciliation. It doesn't erase the past, but it gives them a future." Weeks later, follow-up visits revealed the continued impact. Families stayed in contact, creating support networks for each other. The scholarship received its first applicant, a young woman inspired by the stories of resilience and courage she had learned from the memorials. Community members took ownership of the park memorial, ensuring it remained a place of reflection and inspiration for generations to come. Olivia and Ethan, sitting in their office after the final report was submitted, shared a quiet moment. "It's rare," Olivia said softly, "that the work we do has such a full circle effect. Justice, yes, but also healing and legacy. That's what this is all about." Marcus, leaning against the doorframe with a bemused smile, added, "Don't get sentimental on me now. But yeah, you did good, Harper. All of you did. Lives honored, families healed, and the town knows the truth. That's the best any of us could hope for." The detectives left the office that evening, stepping into the cool breeze of Mobile's streets, carrying with them the satisfaction of work completed, of histories corrected, and of promises kept. As they walked past city halls, churches, and parks that now bore the weight of memory and the light of remembrance, the journey of decades came full circle. Each step was a quiet acknowledgement of the pain endured, the resilience displayed, and the hope that even the darkest chapters could give rise to healing. In the final days of 2023, the last formal ceremony for the Trent cases was held at a renovated Alabaster Community Park. Families, now friends, gathered to watch the installation of a series of small plaques, each detailing the life of a victim and her unique contributions to the world. Children played nearby, laughter rising like a gentle counterpoint to the solemnity of remembrance. Olivia, Ethan, and Marcus stood to the side, watching the interactions between the families, seeing moments of connection, understanding, and forgiveness that had seemed impossible just a few years prior. Olivia adjusted the locket she had kept on her desk, containing a small photo of one of the first victims she had worked on decades ago. It rested warmly against her chest, a reminder of the human stories that had driven her career. "We did more than solve cases," she murmured. "We gave back their stories, their voices, and their dignity. That's justice." Ethan smiled quietly, his gaze following the families walking together across the park. "And that's the real reward. Not the headlines, not the accolades, but knowing that in some small way, we helped mend what was broken." Marcus, watching a young girl approach one of the memorial plaques and run her fingers over the names etched in brass, nodded. "Yeah, that's what it's all about. You remember them for who they were, not just how they died." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the park, the memorials stood as silent witnesses to decades of pain, resilience, and healing. The work of Olivia Harper, Ethan Caldwell, and Marcus Donovan was complete, not merely in the sense of closing cases, but in restoring humanity to lives stolen too soon, in creating spaces for remembrance, forgiveness, and hope. And in that quiet golden light, the stories of Mandy Franklin, Naomi Rivers, Vanessa Cortez, Leah Monroe, Hannah Pierce, Felicia Chen, Gabriel Reed, Isabel Kim, Veronica Delgado, and Meredith Sloan lived on, not as names in a cold file, but as real, cherished lives whose memories would continue to inspire, teach, and comfort generations to come. Thank you for joining us in uncovering stories hidden in the shadows. Every victim deserves to be remembered. Every truth deserves to be told. To follow more cold cases, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share these stories. Your support helps keep their voices alive.